Good evening. What a precious thing to be here this evening.
Amen.
There aren't enough spaces like this in the world.
Amen.
Where we get to hear the testimonies and voices that speak to our hearts in such a powerful way. I want to thank you for the privilege, Reverend Karen and VICA and everyone who invited me to speak this evening. And thanks to all who worked on this service, who have made it something to look forward to year after year. I am the co-pastor of Suncoast MCC here in Venice, along with Reverend Vicki Miller. Our church has been here about 25 years and is part of a global denomination that is 50 years old, Metropolitan Community Churches, that was founded by Reverend Troy Perry, a gay man who sought Christian community that was open to everyone. Besides MCC, I probably feel most at home in these eclectic interfaith settings. I believe that interfaith connection and community is the key to creating peace and justice locally and globally. Religion can be the most powerful force, unfortunately, for intolerance, separation, hatred, and violence. Or it can be a force for peace, justice, tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. Even in these times, where the fastest growing religious sector in the U.S. is the growth of the nones, meaning those with no religious affiliation, the voice and visibility of interfaith cooperation is a powerful witness. People who have been alienated from religion are actually intrigued and hopeful when we get out of our comfort zones and meet one another in spaces like this. And what unites us is not our rituals or liturgies, our theologies or religious culture, but our spiritual values, like an interconnecting thread that weaves itself through our traditions. And we are not here in spite of our differences, but because of our differences. Our diverse traditions and cultures that are a source of fascination and joy. Because there is diversity in the unity we seek, to love our neighbors means to be curious about them. My friend Johann Gebecki, and a member of Metropolitan Community Church in Germany, won the European Citizens Prize for this experiment. He took photographs of the sanctuaries of a Christian church, a Jewish synagogue, and a mosque. He then asked the church to display pictures of the mosque in their sanctuary and to invite the public to come and see them. Then he asked the synagogue to display pictures of the Christian church and invited the public to come and see them. And then the mosque to display photos of the synagogue in their sanctuary and invited the public to see them. He then actually took photographs of the events themselves and the people who were looking at these photographs and took this on the road to houses of worship all over Europe and the United States. How powerful to challenge taboos using art to break down our isolation, our fears, and misunderstandings of one another. I believe there are three imperatives for us as people of faith who are committed to openness, freedom, and love. The first is showing up. Presence is power. Over the decades, I've learned that peace and justice often begin with just showing up for one another. The way VICA showed up for our Jewish community after the terrible shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Just one example. I wish I could say I don't feel like we're going to have to show up for each other again like that, but I suspect we will in the days and years to come. In the late 1980s and 90s, there was a national organization of interfaith leaders that included MCC that worked with the CDC and the White House and Congress to shift U.S. domestic policy to help prevent and treat HIV and AIDS. There were many religious groups that contributed to the bigotry and hatred in those days, saying that AIDS was God's gift. But in contrast, many more leaders and communities of faith showed up for our community. They used their moral voice to call attention to the fact that people were dying and needed help. Showing up in each other's houses of worship for special occasions in crises is the beginning of breaking down the barriers, the insularity. Showing up for one another is a powerful witness to what kind of world we want to live in. I want to live in a world where every community of faith is safe and valued and seen. Secondly, listening and learning. The book of James, called by some a bossy book, there's a lot of instruction in it, says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. To listen in an engaged, open-hearted way is one of the great gifts we can offer one another. If you recall a time you were listened to deeply and attentively, you will remember how healing it was. In our world of social media, of multitasking, our interfaith commitment to listening deeply to each other is countercultural. Our houses of worship are symbols of what it means for us to live attentively to the divine in our midst today. Amen. Here in this interfaith gathering, we bring the power of listening to the divine and to one another in this room. Right. You know, sometimes listening is trivialized, but listening is not passive. Active listening means listening with our whole bodies, minds, and hearts. As we listen, we are changed by what we hear. And the speaker is changed. True active listening is transformative. Amen. Some of you will remember the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. 90% of it was engaged public listening to the damage caused by apartheid. It lanced an enormous wound for that listening to happen. It helped heal a nation as it transitioned to an open democracy. And listening is also learning. The upcoming VICA presentations on race is such a timely, urgent opportunity to listen deeply and to be changed. In so many ways, race and racism, unexamined white supremacy, continues to be the cause of so much suffering and impacts the quality of life for all our communities. Amen. Amen. Last but not least, we are called to act with courage. Not just to show up, but sometimes to stand up. Amen. And not to act without having listened first. Sometimes in our rush to do good or to give, we put the cart before the horse, and we give what is not needed. The book of James exhorts us to be doers of the word and not hearers only. In another passage, he says, faith without works is dead. Now, Christians had hundreds of years of fights and conflicts about that verse and what it really meant. But I think it simply means that a living faith produces living fruit, which is action that heals the world. Amen. Sometimes in our own neighborhood and sometimes globally. Several years ago, a youth from our church and young adult group made a trip to the Dominican Republic to visit an orphanage for children impacted by HIV and AIDS. Their role was to listen, learn, and then to help. I asked one young woman who was transgender to tell me why she was giving up her vacation from her first year in college to go on this trip. She told me that when she was 6 years old, her drug-addicted mother died of AIDS in Oklahoma. She was then in several foster homes, but was abused and ran away. She ended up on the streets of New York in desperate circumstances as a 15-year-old. She herself was diagnosed with HIV, but made her way to the youth shelter operated by Metropolitan Community Church of New York and began a road to recovery, to coming out as transgender. She graduated from high school and had started college. I will never forget what she said to me. She said, Reverend Wilson, I'm going on this trip because I am so fortunate, and I want to share my story of hope with these kids. Now, I'm not sure if I were orphaned at 6, homeless, had contracted HIV, that I would ever describe myself as fortunate, but she saw the redemptive value of her story, as we've heard tonight, and was empowered to act courageously. There are spiritual values at stake that we must stand up for: the love of neighbor, compassion, justice, and peace. James says, ultimately, it's about caring for widows and orphans and for the most vulnerable among us. This is the kind of action that pleases God.
Amen.
We need to listen and act in response to those who are vulnerable in our culture today. Children separated from their parents in detention tonight, maybe 14,000 of them. Refugees fleeing death, starvation, or war. For those in prison tonight. For the ways in which racism impacts our neighbors and our souls. For those of our neighbors struggling with drug addiction, fueled by those who have made a profit off of the suffering of others. We need one another. We need to show up for one another, listen and learn from each other, and dare to act with courage.
Amen.
The scriptures we read also say, do not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we do not lose heart. Let's not lose heart, even in a tough season, but grow in our connection to one another, especially as communities of faith. I want to thank you, in the midst of what is often a very busy time with family and friends, for showing up tonight. I am inspired and blessed by all of you, and what you do every day for your communities. Amen.
Amen.